So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there. My first question to you is this, okay?
Yeah.
Got you a snazzy iPad and you managed to get yourself a really shit case for it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Why do you still need to take notes with a pen?
Because it's a technique for remembering stuff.
Yeah.
You see the way
like
you
you're still
just...
in school.
No. As you write something down, it goes into your brain.
Yeah.
Now, all of these concepts, of course, are, alien to you.
Yeah.
But you know when we do the pods and I remember the dates and stuff?
Yeah, but I have them all in front of me. I mean, that was the point of you getting an iPad. But anyway.
No, it's the writing. It's a way for things to be remembered.
Okay.
That's why...
a total swot.
I actually wasn't.
You're not.
But I mean, I'm just hyper intelligent.
Secret studier, I'd say.
No.
Anyway, Hughie Irwin certainly wasn't a secret studier.
No, he wasn't.
Okay, Hughie Irwin, Sligo's sort of famous son, shall we say, in gangland terms. He is living in squalor, according to his son, who appeared in Sligo Circuit Civil Court in relation to a personal injury claim. And this evidence, he spoke about his father's living conditions.
Yeah.
Now, can I say that many moons ago, I'm not even going to try and remember when, but it's certainly 10 years ago, Hughie Irwin was living in similar conditions in that same house. St. Joseph's Terrace, I think, is the family home.
Yeah.
The Irwins used to have a bar out the back of it in sort of... Actually, yes, they were, I was going to say in Mr. Flashy style, but in actual fact, they were first with that.
Yeah.
And the house definitely is extremely run down, and Hughie Irwin has a very chaotic lifestyle for somebody who was once the leader of a very serious and significant organised crime group. He sort of has fallen from grace and certainly has no extravagant lifestyle. You're not seeing those flash cars outside the house. You're not seeing the lines of glamorous women.
No.
And there doesn't seem to be properties abroad.
No, there's no like cryptocurrency purchase worth millions or anything like that. I mean, we sometimes ask about, we talk about these guys, where it all ends up after their criminal careers, because there is actually a time limitation on them to some extent, because newer people come up. And of course, the Barry Young gang came, they ended up in dispute, but the Barry Young gang took over the drugs trade in a large part, certainly at times. But Hughie Irwin, he's living in squalor, according to his son. He describes his father's conditions as being the worst conditions a man could be living in. He says, my father's house was a derelict house. There's no electricity or running water. All the money went on the house. He's speaking about the money he got at a previous condition. And he says his father's not well and he's his carer. Now, if you go back...
The father must be early 50s, I'm going to say.
Yeah, maybe even slightly older.
Maybe slightly younger? Older?
Yeah, I would think so, yeah. Just maybe mid-50s now at this stage.
Okay.
I'll have to check that up. But,
so go back all the way to 96, which is 30 years ago?
It is.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And he sort of first hits the headlines because he's charged with assaulting a man.
Yeah.
As well as trespass. Now, the police in Sligo are well aware of Hughie Irwin at this stage, but... the witnesses that were involved in that case told the court they didn't want to give evidence against their alleged attackers. They said they were friends now, but there was suspicion around whether or not there had been some intimidation or threats made, because Irwin was a very significant force in the town all the way back then. And, certainly from the Garda point of view, he was already a target then.
Yeah, I mean, I think as the 90s came to a close and the start of the new century, what you had was that the drugs started to spread into rural Ireland, often from the Marlow Highland gang or Eamon Don, who took over that gang. They became these big regional suppliers. And while there would always been cannabis and things like that in places like in Sligo, the Irwins were one of the first proper organised crime groups that started making a lot of money and taking over a bit of territory. And with that rise in power, also came a degree of violence. So as you see, Hughie Irwin, as he in the 90s, he's starting to appear in courts.
Assaults, traffic offences, this kind of thing. A chaotic character, I'd say.
Chaotic character.
You can see from his convictions that he would be impulsive and doesn't have a huge amount of control over his emotions. He's somebody who's going to lose his temper, lash out, that kind of thing.
But as you see in this time, you see that this money starts to circulate through the drugs trade in those towns. I mean, cocaine, which had been at the start of the 90s was rare in Dublin, and very expensive, probably only, reaching into sort of high society and probably on the street to an extent. But by the end of the 90s, that had been starting to circulate around all parts of rural Ireland. And there was big money to be made. Those connections had been developed between Hughie Irwin and another associate who we can't name for legal reasons with Dublin gangs. And they didn't just control Sligo town. It stretched across that old northwest part of Ireland.
And I suppose by the mid-2000s, what you have going on is you have the feud happening in Limerick.
Yeah.
You have the feud happening in Drimna, in Dublin. And, warring factions are pitched against one another. And they're the two centres of gangland activity really in Ireland, south of the border anyway. But then all of a sudden there's an explosion of violence in Sligo. 2005, Irwin was shot and injured himself in the lower back. And then that same year, Hughie Irwin Sr. was one of 3 people arrested and questioned for the murder of Hughie McGinley. And that happened in April of 2005. Now, McGinley would have been sort of leading a rival faction in the town. The McGinley and his associates would have been very well-known criminals. They were also after a cut of that cocaine market that had existed. Sligo's location is interesting, isn't it? Because it feeds right up into the north, to the northwest, and into Donegal, over the border towards Derry. And ultimately nowadays, a lot of activity goes on between Sligo and directly to Belfast.
Yeah, just like
it's geographically well positioned for the drug trade. And
also into the Midlands as well, which of course traditionally drugs come from Dublin to the Midlands, but they also started coming back from the Northwest. Hughie Irwin was arrested in connection with that murder. And if you remember at the time it was...
Are you going to tell the disgusting story?
Well, I will say, because he wasn't charged and never faced any charges in connection with it. But when he was arrested, he famously smeared excrement on his face while in police custody.
Quote.
Go on.
You do. No, I'm way too posh for this.
So he was in Cavan Garda station and he was brought in a cup of tea, and as you do, he told the female Garda he'd eaten his own excrement, which was on his mouth and face, and said, "It's my own shit. I eat my own shit," he told her.
Ugh.
And afterwards, he cleaned himself up using blankets in his cell. Now, he's not alone for some reason.
He's not alone doing that.
I mean, the Mark Desmond, the guinea pig, also did it at one point, and
it's a kind of...
Was it a Shavo Hogan have done it?
Shavo Hogan, I can vaguely see photographs of all these people. Yeah. Black and white, mind you, are a little bit easier to cope with. And, that's a kind of a... it's
what is it?
A reaction to authority, isn't it? And
it's a reaction,
police and all the rest of it. And it's trying to make the guards violently ill, basically, as they're trying to question.
And there was a compensation claim brought by the Garda in this case. But so what it is, I think,
and he actually, I think, pleaded guilty to criminal damage of his cell, or that.
Yeah, because I think that was
incident
to do with the wiping it on the blankets. But I suppose it's a thing where
we're moving on now.
Well, I suppose they're there for 24 hours when you're being questioned for these crimes, or longer in some cases. You have to sit there, and guards have to ask you these questions. Like that is a legal thing. And in those circumstances, some of the guys just do the no comment and stare at the wall. But some of these guys who are so aggressive, this is the route they take. Smear themselves.
As I said, moving on. So in the aftermath of this, from memory, I think Hughie Irwin then became extremely paranoid that he was going to be shot. And he started locking himself away within that house in St. Joseph's Terrace. It's probably around that time that they build the bar out the back, because he's not comfortable out and about. He feels he's a target of the McGinley crew, or associates of Hughie McGinley, out to avenge his murder. And you can certainly see the mental health having issues with all that paranoia, that fear that he's living in. And within a couple of years, certainly, he's based in Lanzarote. He's moved out there, and he has left a younger associate in charge of the crew. But they're making a lot of money down there at the time. They just never seem to have an ability to, well, hang on to it, first of all. Of course, they did pump some money, or Gardaí believed, into some ice cream vans, into some boats that they had on the lakes. And of course, another associate had an extremely nice house built, which was subsequently seized by the Criminal Assets Bureau. So they tried to become that sophisticated, organised crime mob, but they always seemed to be, the Irwin crew, drawn back to the original family home at St. Joseph's Terrace, and back to that as a headquarters of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did make a lot of money, and I don't think they probably had the sophistication to know how to take it to the next step, which is really semi-legitimise it, stay away from the street dealing, stay away from getting in trouble over nothing. Hughie Irwin's close associate that we can't name, for example, he was caught sort of red-handed with a kilo of cocaine. So they just weren't able to take that next step. Hughie Irwin went over to Spain, where it was suspected he sort of went up to a higher level and was dealing with importations and all that side of business. But yeah, they couldn't hold it together. And at the same time, the Barry Young organisation was just beginning. Barry Young, who was, a decade younger, he was starting to make those sort of strides as you go into the 2010s. The Irwins were in and out of the picture, certainly the most notorious, because obviously the Irwin gang were blamed for the Hughie McGinley murder, but the fact was they bought those sort of gangland feuds. Were, you can't, except for Limerick, Dublin and Cork, I suppose, at some stage in the early 90s, there were no other sort of gangland killings in or around Ireland. I mean, shootings of that type weren't happening. So they were the first sort of rural crime organisation to do that.
Yeah.
And that's some of the notoriety got to them. But once again, as we see, and we saw in Drogheda recently, once the guards really stepped in on top of them, the gang couldn't survive.
Because it was 2008 when the guards actually launched Operation Golf, which was to target the Irwin operation. And they brought in specialist units from Dublin to help the local network that was policing them. And the Criminal Assets Bureau then came along, and there was all sorts of seizures of houses and boats, and it was colourful stuff seized, I remember.
There was
the ice cream van that stands out.
Well, the ice cream van, because and God knows I'm not casting aspersions on all ice cream van owners, but ice cream vans have been, associated with
caught up in organised crime.
Well, they have been.
No, they have, sure. Of
and
course,
I mean, and not just in Ireland.
Of course, there's a documentary about the ice cream van wars.
In Scotland.
They were a way of, certainly in Scotland, they were a way of transporting drugs, obviously, with right into communities, right into the heart of the communities, in the guise of children's ice cream vans. And of course, they were bringing the drugs in, and they were selling them out the back while they were able to kind of get cover for a while.
But also, it's one of those cash businesses,
it is,
and that's really been the value of it to Irish criminals. Some of them that have been involved. Vans. Still, well, they are absolutely. I saw one just
mainly though now.
They drive. No, they drive around and turn on the noise and
music.
Well, yeah, honestly, yeah, totally.
When you work in our job, that music is sinister. I suppose if you're a more normal individual, you think that's kind of child.
Absolutely. I mean, they go around Cabra. I just saw them. Even in the bad weather, but on summer you'll see them every single day, driving around, turning on the music and stopping. So, and there's no association, all of these things, but they have been of value to criminals. Certainly, another associate of the Irwins, Brian Colopy in Limerick, he also ran a van. But Hughie Irwin and his associate, ultimately Cab, got a lot of orders in 2011. They named Hughie Irwin, his associate, really as the kind of the heads of this gang. Hughie Irwin personally, I think, had I think it was €86,000 in a bank account that was associated with him that was seized. There was other money taken as well. I think it was 106,000 in total. An ice cream van, I think a pleasure boat, but basically, I suppose that part of the world, there's many opportunities for boating and a car. So you can see, obviously, Hughie Irwin's younger associate had that home that you spoke about that was much more, worth 300,000-400,000, I think. So you see that even though it's not millions and buying properties on the Palm Jumeirah, this is still big money, and these people as well, while they lived the high life. And
it was
Sligo.
Actually after 2011 when the Cab got they secured those confiscation orders that Hughie Irwin returns to Ireland. His associate in and around that time is caught with some cocaine and ends up in jail.
Yeah.
Barry Young's operation is really challenging the power of the Irwins and probably a much more organised grouping.
Yes.
Although a lot of violence is used and a lot of enforcers are brought in. We'll get to that maybe. But Hughie Irwin returns to Sligo, and definitely it's around that point. I was trying to remember how many years ago. There was a kind of the Real IRA were involved. There was wars being declared.
Yes. Well, what happened actually was Mark Desmond, who just coincidentally we named earlier, he came down to Sligo.
The guinea pig was his nickname.
I mean, literally one of the most feared and dangerous criminals in Dublin's history.
Based in the Ballyfermot area.
Yes, and he ultimately came down and associated with Barry Young. The Real IRA had quite a strong base, very strong connections with the Alan Ryan crew, who were at their peak at this time as well in Dublin. So
and I suppose as well is the point, because why Sligo geographically is an important base for organised crime, because the Real IRA, obviously it's near the border.
Yeah.
Very easy to go over and back the border from Sligo.
So there was all that mix in the middle. Barry Young and the Real IRA really went toe to toe, but the Irwins kind of got subsumed at that point. Certainly, the primary mover in that Irwin gang was behind bars, and I think Hughie was back at home in the family home, as we've spoken about. According to his son, he's a very heavy drinker, and we heard that in court last week. And paranoid, we certainly know that. And living in the family home. And
he was locked away there because, I mean, we were interested in trying to get a photograph of him. He hadn't been photographed in, kind of coming on a decade at that point. He was back from Lanzarote. He was back essentially to take on, the mantle of the Irwin organisation and to bring it forward and to kind of, stand there against its rivals. But he didn't seem capable at that stage. I mean, we spent days, weeks maybe down trying to wait for that opportunity that he would come out that door. He never did.
Yeah, and certainly the electricity, I don't know, in the last decade, has that electricity been on?
Would have been a council house, whether they bought it out or something at the time. But yeah.
I mean, there was no electricity, so it was... Yeah. So it was a strange scenario, and then over the next decade, so that's roughly a decade to now, Hughie Irwin would appear in court periodically, never for anything of great significance, but a stream of kind of, I think there was one in 2015, pleaded guilty to charges of threatening, abusive and insulting behaviour, failing to comply with directions of Gardaí. They had to restrain him. When they did ask him to leave the area, he did, but sometime later they got a call. There was a guy going crazy in the family home, throwing items on the street. He was then arrested. Similar things happened in 2018. Actually, the arrest in 2018, you probably get a sense of where his head was, because he appeared for driving offence. He broke a red light, and at that court hearing, he told how he'd been a victim of a shooting before. I think he held up a document, which I presume is a gym form, saying there was had been advising him of his personal security and saying, I was told if I did not feel safe that I was to go, somebody could be planning a shooting. I'm always concerned when I leave my house.
Now, other members of the Irwin family were also sort of living chaotic lives, because it was 2019 when his brother Tommy Irwin was attending a wedding where a number of the sort of significant players in the Irwin network were at, and it was in some really nice hotel.
Yeah.
And he had jumped from a balcony and sort of literally swung from the chandelier across the room.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure was not funny for the people who owned the hotel. But he had also chaotically ended up on a rooftop on a house in the town. Maybe it was the house in St. Joseph Terrace, and there was a sort of a standoff as police tried to coax him down. He was like a bird perched up on top of the thing. And Tommy Irwin did pass away. But you know, it's interesting to see as you're moving forward from then 2019, when they are still a significant force. There's other stuff that's been going on around that time that we can't discuss quite yet. It's before the courts, but he's becoming more and more of a hermit within that house. And of course, then we get this glimpse into what's happening in his life when his son appears in court.
Yeah, and of course the son has his known involvement in crime, and he spoke about his father just in the context of a previous claim where his father had been involved. But Hughie Irwin Jr. Shares a name with his father. He brought a 60,000 euro damages claim against the county council, the local county council. He tripped on a ramp and fell, broken his tooth, and hurt his head. And the claim was dismissed by the judge. Ultimately, he said not all falls are someone's fault. He'd spoken about,
he said he couldn't get a job because of his name.
He said he couldn't get into pubs, never mind a job because of because of the Irwin name. And he also said about his tooth, that it has impacted his life having a broken tooth, and he couldn't smile if he sees a good-looking woman in a shop.
Now, more importantly, he told the court, right, that he'd given all of his money to his father, Hughie Irwin Sr., who he said was living in squalor, no electricity, no running water. He said that his father had bad mental health problems and drinks all the time, and he acts as a carer for him.
Yeah.
And to quote him, he said, "My father's house was a derelict house. There was no electricity or running water. All the money went into the home. My father was living in the worst conditions a man could be living. He was a man who brought me up. My father suffers. He's not well. I'm a carer for him too." And asked why his father, who was the only other witness to this fall, wasn't in court to give evidence, he said, "His mental health problems are bad. I wouldn't be able to tell you where he is." He said the last time he'd seen him was around 5 days previously, and he said he drinks all the time and does whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look,
it's not a very glittering end to somebody who has dedicated their life to organised crime and to trying to get wealthy.
No, it's not. It's not a glittering end, and Hughie Irwin Jr. You can feel for the guy. That's a difficult circumstance to have a parent in. But I suppose the other member of the gang, who we haven't named, he also, had a brief moment of glory, and that moment is past as well.
Still has aspirations. I mean, I wonder where things are in Sligo. You have Barry Young in prison serving a 10-year sentence, having pleaded guilty to directing an organised crime gang. And a network of his are also serving prison sentences. Some of them could be still before the courts, not 100% sure. You have the Criminal Assets Bureau on his case. Are they gone? Or is there a kind of a younger crew of Irwins and younger crew of Barry Young's guys out there now who are going to fight it out even further?
I mean, there was always a tradition with the Collopy gang who also supplied Limerick. While we talk about, obviously the Irwin's connections with the Marlow Highland gang or the gang that was taken over by Eamon were well established. But really what was meant to have happened was the gangs, the Irwin gang and their associates would get drugs from whoever had it most simply. So the Collopys had a very deep presence within Sligo as well. But the Barry Young dealt with another network, a network controlled by a man we call Mr. Big. And that national network Mr. Big had, I would imagine retains a big interest in Sligo, whether they're primary agent Barry Young is there or not. That Mr. Big Network seems to have tentacles all over that part of the country, and absolutely 100% very much in the north, also very much in Galway and along the border areas. So while Barry Young might be gone, I would imagine that network still is the primary source.
So he went out. Okay, thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola. Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.